Hey, what's up guys? My name's Dan. I'm a developer at cars.coza and we're in the middle of a rewrite project at the moment, which is why I'm going to be talking to you about whether you should rewrite. Before I start, I just want to say thanks to DevConf for having me here. This is really weird. I was expecting to do this in front of people, so by not doing that, I decided I'd take advantage of being able to pre-record it. I'm assuming if you guys are watching a talk on whether you should be rewriting, you're probably in the cuck, or maybe at the very least, you want to know that you're not alone. So you aren't. Let's get to it. Let's start off with the basic question. Should you rewrite? Well, should you mix mustard and Smarties? No, you shouldn't. Do your running shorts go with your suit? No, they don't. Don't shake hands.
We must minimize physical contact with other people and encourage the elbow greeting rather, which is this.
So, when you're working on that project, you're getting frustrated with that code, should you rewrite it? I'm going to say, most of the time, that's a no. That really is not to say that every time you push to master, you feel the need to go on OfficeZen and create a profile, that you shouldn't do something about that, because you should do something about that. So, here you are. You're in the position where you wake up, you go get your coffee, you sit at your desk, and you open your IDE, which you've spent hours making look awesome.
Life is filled with so many decisions, it's ridiculous.
And when you start working, you're looking at legacy code, and your heart sinks. You know you could write it better. But don't just do it. Not just yet. Because I'm telling you, 99% of the time, you shouldn't. So should you rewrite? I'm going to say most likely the answer is no. You don't need to rewrite. And there's other things you should do instead. But like I said, I am busy rewriting the front end site of cars.co.za. So I'll get into why we're doing that a bit later. For now, I want to cover a few topics. I want to cover why rewriting is so appealing and why we shouldn't rewrite, what we should do instead of rewriting, and then I'll go into why I am rewriting and the lessons that we've learned at Cars. I'll also give you a bit of an example of how we're actually going about the rewrite project at cars.co.za. First off, the idea of rewriting, it's like candy for devs. Every time you see a new code base, it's like the sweet job doors have just opened and it's chowing time. And it seems to be like this no matter what stage you are in your career. Why is it that way? First off, I think it's fun. We're devs. We like to write code. Reading other people's code can be boring and often feel much harder than just rewriting the whole thing and doing it from scratch yourself. Secondly, we like new tech. We may want to try some new tech we've learned, and there is always new tech. Since I started this video, I think 4 new versions of JavaScript have just been launched. There is always something, a new pattern or a new language feature that you want to try. Or maybe even just an idea in your head about a new way to connect things. Another situation, which I've seen a few times, is the dev is new and they're new at their job and they want to show off about maybe how smart they are and they think, let me rewrite this. Another common situation that you can find yourself in is that you're under tight deadline constraints and you don't see yourself figuring out how you can fix a bug or add something new. This problem is actually quite common and it's probably mainly due to a lack of documentation. Think about it. Why are open source projects so easy to integrate with? And it's mostly due to the fact that their whole API is so well documented and easy to follow. Laravel is a really good example of a well-documented framework. All the functions have comments, the config has comments, the documentation is versioned and really easy to read. And I think it's one of the reasons why that framework became so popular. I'm not saying go and comment everything, but I am saying if the code is understandable and people understand what you're doing, then you can work on it a lot faster and a lot easier. On the flip side, you could have been working at your company for a while and think, that you have all this new domain knowledge that just wasn't there when the code was written. You can do a much better job now. I mean, that is, in all honesty, a very fair assumption. You know the scale and the growth pattern of the business, and you're probably, or at least should be, more familiar with your users. You know how the system is designed and how the systems connect, and you also have a feeling of how you can improve it. It might be one of those reasons, but at the end of the day, all of these points boil down to one fact. You want to simplify the code, and that's awesome. As a developer, your skills naturally improve day on day, and you can probably do a better job today than you could yesterday. Those reasons actually all make sense. So why aren't we all just setting time aside to rewrite old legacy code into something better? Why don't we give in to our urges and...
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Well, here are a few reasons. The truth is that if you want to rewrite a code base that has been around for a while, it's probably filled with a bunch of nuance. Because we simplify all this nuance, we tend to think that a rewrite would be quite simple because we don't have these edge cases in our mind. Take, for example, there's a slug in the URL for the car title and its location, which seems simple enough. I didn't think it was going to take too long to make the slug. But then you look into it, and inside the database, there's 5 fields which could relate to the location of the car. So then you go and you search the old code base for how it generates the slug. Okay, and then we get this, a function with the comment, build the concatenated string that appears in the URL for vehicles. That's perfect. That sounds like exactly what I need. And I see there which location is used from the database and the logic behind it, but there's still no hyphens. It's actually not the string that I need. Then you go and you look at the function that actually calls this function, and then I see there's another 2 layers behind this function. And by having little edge cases like this, the complexity of the project just builds up slowly over time. As a developer, you really don't want to lose focus on what your goal is. And for majority of us, the goal is pretty similar. It's benefiting the end user, or at least mitigating the impact we will have on the end user. And this is actually no small feat. We also really need to take into account whether rewriting will make us only focus on our current goals and completely lose sight of our future goals. We always want to push stuff out and improve end user experience and add features, while at the same time not making the user feel like they've lost touch with our product. This is a whole other talk in itself, but it's actually really important when you're looking at rewriting, especially when you're doing front-end work. We need to really understand the impact that small changes can have on our product. If you take, for example, eBay, when they transitioned from their old yellow look to the more modern white look that Google introduced at the time, they got a lot of backlash when they switched it over from one day to the next. So eventually what they had to do was transition from yellow to white gradually over the span of a year. We also need to realize that with rewriting, there may be no potential benefit for the end user. This means they may not notice a difference in any regard. And you have to weigh up, if the end user doesn't notice anything, should we rewrite the product or should we just move on and find a different way to handle things? By rewriting, we may reduce the feature set. And this might not actually be such a bad thing. So what we do at Cars is we monitor feature usage using a platform called Hotjar. And this gives us heat maps and video recordings and just shows us how users actually interact with our website, which is really good knowledge if you're going to be looking at dropping or adding features. Discuss with business what features you may be willing to lose or slow down production with. The biggest issue, I think, with rewriting is that there's no code base to leverage off. We take for granted what's already been set up. If we think about that, there's no database integration, there's no analytics integration, there's no styling, there's no email templates, there's got to be no boilerplate. And that takes a long time to set up. So even though you may have a simple idea of how things will work in your mind and you've sped up the process in that regard, I'm telling you a rewrite will most likely take 2 to 4 times longer than what you're actually thinking. You may be working with a new language or a whole new framework, and you have to learn that, and your team has to learn that, and everyone has to see how the rewrite is going and why you're rewriting, and then you have to weigh that up. Because think about it, all code is going to eventually become legacy code. That's the way it works. At the end of the day, the whole thing about rewriting and about programming in general is that we want to make our users' lives better, not technically our own.
In one survey, half of new users said they were ready to throw their computers out the window out of sheer frustration.
I have no idea what this disk drive is. No idea.
No wonder the book series Computers for Dummies has sold 18 million copies.
Rewriting legacy code will probably have the purpose of making your life as a developer better and easier. The goal is to improve our users' lives with products and features that they need. I'm not saying don't rewrite all the time, but take into consideration how long a rewrite will take versus how long creating a new feature will take that will improve the product in that regard. So just weigh those up. Okay, so if the goal is to promote new features and avoid rewriting, how do you actually do that while at the same time getting rid of legacy code? The answer is going to shock you. Just joking, I know it didn't shock you, but hear me out. So, there are still issues with refactoring. First off, we have deadlines. There's no time to always just be refactoring everything or reviewing old code. We need to produce new features and get new code out. We can't always spend our time focusing on what was done in the past. Secondly, is it even worthwhile refactoring if somebody else is just going to come along and mess up your hard work? Also, is half a refactor better than nothing? What I mean by that is you don't have time to go into every method and every function and make things perfect or the way that you think they should work. But you can do it in one small place. Is that better than nothing, or should you have just saved your time? Fourth, what if I break everything? Without testing, it's very hard to tell which aspects of the system you might influence. I think we've all been in that situation where we're working on a small piece of code and we're like, okay, this is just going to be for me, I'm going to fix it up and it's going to work well here. But somewhere along the line, something else breaks. Maybe it's a JavaScript library that needs to be included, or a function that you thought nothing else used and turns out you were wrong. But whatever it is, we've been there. And fifth, the last thing, and the big thing, is legacy code can really suck to work with. It's hard to understand. How can you even refactor something if you don't even know what the thing is supposed to do or how it was working before? But I'm telling you, for the love of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph, don't go straight to the rewrite. I've got an idea that can help you solve your issues. Here it is. So all you have to do is get the ball rolling and work together as a team.
Alright, partner. Keep on rolling, baby.
So, what does working as a team actually entail? Like, what should you guys do together that will improve the projects as a whole? Well, I've boiled it down to 5 key things. The first one being decide on coding standards. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean like simple things. Decide on how you guys name your variables. Do you use snake case or camel case? Do you abbreviate? Don't ever abbreviate, by the way. But it extends further than that. With CSS, do you use a methodology, like do you use BEM, or do you use a certain style of CSS? Do you use less or Sass, or do you use pure CSS? It also goes to coding paradigms. Do you guys prefer object-oriented programming or functional programming? Do you guys prefer microservices or monolithic architecture? Do you guys follow a certain set of principles, like solid principles? If one person follows solid and another person doesn't, then what is the point of that one person following those principles? You guys should decide as a team what is important to you. So that's really important, because that means that when you're looking at somebody else's code, you won't feel the need to want to rewrite it, because it's already written the way that you would write it, the way that the company writes. The second point is that you guys should trust each other. Trust each other to get the same quality of work out. So that means that you trust everyone to uphold the same standard to the same quality that you would, which is a big deal. And it's hard. Maybe you have a junior, you have to mentor them and show them how things should work, but that's how we learn. The third point is that you need to define your trade-offs. So if you're pushed for a deadline, what do? Do you compromise code quality, or do you not create tests? Or do you say, if we don't have good code quality and we don't have good tests, we compromise the deadline? You need to decide on how you handle situations like that, because you're not always going to be in the situation where everything is perfect. You have all the time in the world to refactor and make things perfect, because that's just not how the world works. The fourth point I want to make is make testing a priority, because that allows you to refactor in confidence. Tests are not for the developer at the time. It's for the guy who comes after you a year or two later. Like if you're writing an API and you add a new field to the API, make a check that the field is there and that the value is there. And then if somebody updates the API 2 years from now, at least they can go back to that test and see if they've affected anything. If they're not sure if it needs to be there or something like that. By having tests in place, you allow developers to refactor functions or classes, and they can run the tests and then see if they've broken anything. The fifth key point I made here is that you guys have to do code reviews and pull requests. If someone is showcasing their work, chances are they're not going to want to showcase bad work. They want to impress everyone. So at Cars, what we do is we meet up every Friday and we show each other what we've been working on throughout the week and how we did it and why we did it. And everyone gets to have a bit of input and see if they can think of a different way if something is not right. And we get to bounce ideas off of one another. The other thing we also do is that we do PRs. Like nothing goes live without having been seen by someone else through a PR. And we trust that everyone doing the PRs will uphold the same quality as you would, and it really does improve things. So what working as a team really does is it allows a developer to go work on a project, understand how that project is most likely structured, understand that they will also structure it in the same way, and that you won't have to go back and refactor. So if you don't have these principles in place, you can't actually do a refactor, because somebody else might just refactor your refactor, and then it's a never-ending cycle. What you want to do is set out some key standards and key points, and then slowly start implementing them in your current projects, and then your future projects as well. And then slowly your legacy code won't look as legacy as it used to. So once you have teamwork down, I recommend the next thing you do is take a look at how you maintain your code bases. So Peter, who's a developer at Cars, and he's actually giving a talk later on hiring in South Africa, which I suggest you watch later. He came up with this analogy. He says that neglecting your code bases is like not watering your plants. They will die slowly. And I think it's really apt. So I came up with a few pointers on how we can better maintain our code bases.
This just needs to cook for another 11 hours, 32 minutes, and 6...
There's no way we can clean this up by ourselves. We're gonna need help.
No. What are you saying?
So what does maintaining your code actually entail? Well, the first suggestion I make is that upgrade your versions. If you're on version 5.2 and version 5.3 has been released, upgrade to it. It may take you an hour, but upgrading from version 5.2 to 6 may take you the entire time until version 7 comes out. Other than that, you should also look at the new features offered by the new versions. You may be doing something that could benefit greatly from an update. One of my favorite examples of this is in PHP 7 they introduced the null coalescing operator, which lets us take this line where you check if a person has a name, then you return the name, otherwise you return guest. It lets us default that if person name exists, then return that, otherwise return guest. It doesn't look like that big of a change, but if you think about it, that's 40% less code. And from a Rich Harris talk I watched recently, the amount of lines of code is actually relative to how many bugs an application has. regardless of language. So that's quite scary, especially for you Java devs. The other thing that you should actually do is, when you maintain your code, is just don't bother with old code that is actually fine, even if it's goose code. So what I mean by that is there may be some cron job or some function that has been running forever at your company, and it might be written badly, but you know, if it's not slow or if it's not buggy, then just leave it.
When you get the urge to meddle, just resist it. The best advice I've ever known is to leave well enough alone. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
So I just want to do a quick review of where we are. The first thing I want to say is don't go straight for the rewrite. There's no code base, so you have to set up a whole lot of boilerplate and you have to make a bunch of decisions again, and you have to figure out nuances to the code. And it's probably just going to take a lot longer than you think it will take, because you are simplifying the project in your mind, because you have this simple version of how things will work. It is most likely going to take longer, and you still have the opportunity to refactor the old code, and that may be your better option. The second point I want to make is, even if you rewrite or you don't rewrite, base your code decisions on team decisions, because that will give you code longevity. If everyone is writing code in the same way and with the same ideas and thoughts and principles in mind, then chances are people aren't going to want to refactor. And when people enter a new code base, they will write it the same way. If somebody goes to an existing code base, they'll be able to understand it because that's the way they work. Last off, I want to say is, just think of the end user. Will a rewrite be worth it for the end user? Will they notice a difference? Or if the point of a rewrite is solely for the developers, is that a good enough reason to do it? Cool, now let's get into the meaty part. Who am I and why am I talking about rewriting? Well, like I said, my name's Dan. There's a full body image of me, and I work at cars.co.za, and I'm busy working with the team to rewrite, not reskin, the consumer-facing portion of our website. For those of you who don't know, cars.co.za is a platform that allows you to search for used and new vehicles. It allows you to compare cars, see vehicle specials, car news. You can sell your car. So it's quite feature-rich. So that leads me to, why are we rewriting? Why? Everyone who uses the platform seems quite happy. It's very performant. Users seem to enjoy it. Dealers seem to enjoy it. We're not really getting any kickback. So why are we rewriting? It's not just to keep a job. Let me give you an analogy about why. Imagine every code base starts off as an empty plot of land. On that empty plot, we lay a foundation, and this consists of our languages and our frameworks. If you look at those carefully, you might see why we're keen on rewriting. And then on top of the foundation, we build pages. So this house would be the car search, and next to it we build a compare cars feature. And you know, some unlucky guy gets to build the terms and conditions page, which is a shed in the back. So eventually though, we have a pretty sweet looking house, and let's call this house Cars Desktop. Then years go by and we need to build a Cars mobile platform, and you know, we decide to build it on top of the Cars Desktop. It doesn't look as great. There are some cracks, and you know, things don't look as sweet as they used to, but it works. So we'll have one section as the Cars mobile and one section as Cars Desktop. Doing that, you will have some issues where you'll find some code in the repo and you'll be like, I don't know what this does, but I'm not going to be the one to remove it. Years pass and we need an app. So we develop an API and we develop an app, and eventually we start having a bit of a neighborhood that looks like this. We have separate code bases which all contain fairly similar logic. We have a desktop and a mobile site, we have a motoring news site, and we have an API which supports the app. If there are any system architects out there who are fond of my house analogy, you guys are more than welcome to use it. But then we come to issues with legacy projects. One issue is that every time we have to add a feature, we have to add the same room to every house. And because they're all designed a little bit differently, it's cumbersome and we're basically duplicating logic. So it's slow to add features. Secondly, because we have all these legacy projects, we have old versions of frameworks. I think you saw Kohana there, and we have old versions of languages where we're not always running the latest version of PHP or JavaScript. Then there's also increased complexity over the years. It becomes harder to maintain these code bases which have similar functionality. So if there's a bug in one code base, it has to be repaired across 4. And it's much harder to spot bugs because they might not happen on all the platforms. One of the biggest issues is that these older projects don't actually maintain the standard of our newer projects. So they don't have continuous integration, for instance, or they don't have testing. So now I want to cover some reasons where you may actually find that you need to rewrite your site. The first one being performance. No one likes a slow performing site, and if you could see a clear avenue of how a rewrite may increase performance, then it might be worth your while. The second reason is deprecated technology. If you're using a framework that's no longer supported or your language version is very old, then it may be time that you start looking at rewriting it into a different language or into the newer version. A third reason is you may need to leverage features of new technology. So this means that you can do things now that you couldn't do previously. A good example of this is you can have state-based components now on your website, whereas jQuery was an event-based system. So if you prefer to use that kind of methodology, then it might be worth your while rewriting jQuery into something like React. The fourth reason is you can now leverage new technical practices of the team that you may not have had before. Maybe you guys use continuous integration, so you can make your new project use that from the start, or you use a different testing framework, or you just have a different way of doing things that's not done in your legacy code, and rewriting might be your quickest option to get to your new practices. The fifth reason is staying up to date with the current market. You don't want to be the guy left behind. If you want to be a market leader or you want to be on top of your game, you may need to rewrite in order to use new technology which can do different things to what your previous code base could. And like I said, if rewriting is the fastest way to get there, then it may be worth your while. How did cars justify rewriting? Well, first off, we looked at our current situation, and we already had an API which is supporting our app, and we could leverage that for a new front end. And we're running stuff on Google Cloud Platform, and we have a lot of the infrastructure set up to be able to have a rewrite and not actually have to set up a whole bunch of boilerplate architectural stuff. The next thing we looked at were performance gains. Performance is vital to the car's product, and the faster we can get, the better. By leveraging a new framework, we'll be able to do things like code splitting, which will improve the speed and improve user experience. The third thing we thought of was now we can consolidate all of our logic into the API, whereas currently there's some logic in our desktop site, some in our mobile site, some in our app. It's spread all over the place. By rewriting, we can consolidate that logic and make a more testable product, which brings me to my next point, point number 4. By developing a universal app, which I'll get into later about how we decided that, we can put out features much faster. Whereas before we'd have to put out a feature on one platform, then another, and try and make them work the same way. Now we can actually just develop that feature once and get them out much faster. Not only will we be able to develop features faster, but now we'll also be able to deploy faster. We can have continuous integration, and we'll be able to deploy instantaneously and seamlessly. Also now when we deploy, it goes through an end-to-end testing cycle, which I'll also get into. The sixth point we had was we can contain this rewrite to a relatively small portion of the car's business, just 2 developers and a product owner. And by doing that, we'll still support our current users and our current setup. So in a way, we'll still have the best of both worlds. We'll be rewriting, but still writing new products with the knowledge that we're still rewriting, if that makes sense. The 7th point we had was we'll be able to reduce the code. And like I said before, the amount of lines of code is actually proportional to the amount of bugs in a project, regardless of language. So that's always a benefit when developing. It's always good to try and write less code than you had before. This also means that when bringing in a new developer, it'll be easier to upskill them and they can become familiar with the code base much more quickly than they can at the moment. With those 7 reasons, I would like to emphasize that if there was no benefit for the end user, then we probably wouldn't have done it. The benefits for the end user here are obvious. They get performance gains, they get features faster, and they'll just get a better performing product, which is, at the end of the day, what we're striving for. So in the last portion of this video, I just want to cover how we at Cars.coza are actually going about rewriting. So I just want to quickly go over the approach we're taking to rewriting at Cars.coza. So the first thing we did was we decided to choose the focus of the project, and we went for focusing on our mobile platform because that's where most of our users are. Also, once we finish rewriting our mobile platform, then we'll be able to export that as a standalone app, which will run on mobile devices. We can get the most amount of coverage for our users in the shortest amount of time. Next, we needed to choose a framework. So we wanted to make a universal app. That means that we can run the same code base on desktop, on mobile, and as an app. And there's a few frameworks which allow you to do this. We also needed the framework to server-side render because that will get us the best SEO performance. So we looked at Next and Nuxt.js and Gatsby and Sapper, and at the end we decided we'd go with Next.js. And the reason for that is it's a React framework and a lot of South African devs want to work in React, so we'll get the most opportunity for developers. Also, there's no real benefit to using any of these frameworks, at least for us, at least that I could see. So we played around with all of them, and at the end of the day, Next.js won out. Though I must say that they're all very good frameworks. Next, we had to decide on a strategy, on what we would deploy. We didn't want to do a complete overhaul. What we wanted to do was just replace a portion of our site with a rewritten project. And the portion of our site we decided to replace was our new car special section. And the reason for that was it was recently updated, so we have new designs. It's also been A/B tested, so we know it's performant and it works. It's a high traffic portion of our site and it's good for lead generation. So when we do our A/B testing, we'll get good numbers out of it. If you look at what's actually involved in the new car special section, you can see we have an index page, we have filters, and we have a form. So there's a lot of reusable components which we can leverage once we finish this portion of the site. Also, we'd have to redo the nav and footer section. So we did A/B testing by A/B testing the rewrite and the current site. We also needed the URLs to remain the same for SEO. So what we did was we used Cloudflare and we split the traffic at the edge using Cloudflare workers. And I'll show you how that works now. Cloudflare is an edge caching CDN with a ton of features, and one of those features is workers. And what workers do is they allow you to run a script on a specific route on your site before your server actually returns anything. So what we can do is when a route gets hit, return a different backend, and I'll show you how we did that. So when you log in, go to your workers tab, then go to manage workers, create a worker. Then I've copied and pasted the script just to make this go a bit quicker. But basically the idea is you want to name your experiment, then you'll want to group, so test or control, whether they get the new site or the old site, and an isNew flag. Then what you do is you check the user's cookies. If they have the experiment 0 cookie set to test or control, then you'll serve them the rewrite or the old site. Or if they're new, you'll randomly assign them the test or control group. If they are part of the test group, what you want to do is replace the URL with your rewrite URL. If it's a new user, you'll set a cookie with the name of the experiment to the group they were assigned to, so that next time they come to the route, they'll be served the same page. Then afterwards, you'll assign this to a route, and that's it. There's zero performance loss with this kind of A/B testing, and it's really cool. Once we split the traffic, we compared the two versions using Google Analytics to see if the conversions improved, maintained the same, or dropped. What we actually saw was that they were quite consistent with our old results. I also want to go over kind of what went wrong. We started off using React Semantic UI, which is a styling framework which uses React components and uses the Semantic UI CSS library. It's really cheap to bring in tools, so you kind of want to play around with everything, but at some point you're going to have to stop. With React Semantic UI, I wasn't really happy with the idea of binding our site to React UI components. I don't really think it's a good idea to bind your styling to your components. React Semantic UI is also a really large library at 100 kilobytes, and it was quite hard to theme. We also added a tool called Storybook.js, which is a tool for visualizing components and seeing the different states that could be in. And that is actually a really cool tool, but once we implemented it, no one was actually using it. So it landed up being a little bit of a waste of time, and we got rid of it. At the end of the day, what we decided to do was use class-based CSS, and we got rid of React Semantic UI and rid of Storybook, and we used a tool called vector.css, purely because it's a really small CSS library and very easy to theme. Once we actually finished the pages, what we had to do was test, and testing took a couple of months of solid work. The reason for that is Cars supports some very old phones and very old browsers, so to get a new library like Next.js working on these phones was quite difficult and took a lot of time. Eventually, it was starting to take so much time that we had to wonder, do we need to drop support for old browsers? So what we did was we looked at our analytics and we decided that we'll support all browsers with a certain percentage of users. We won't drop support for old browsers, but we'll serve them the old site. So what we saw was that we didn't actually get a very big increase in conversions, but we got a lot out of the project. Firstly, now we have a universal app. It exports as an app and it can also run on desktop. So we have that single code base, which is actually what the point of the project was. It wasn't to increase conversions. And also the speed of the website has improved considerably. There was also a lot of stuff we got for free, just because that's how we make projects now. We got the new architecture decisions. We deploy using continuous integration using Circle CI. We deploy on the cloud, on Google Cloud Platform with Kubernetes. And we have end-to-end testing using Cypress.io. All of these are new features which we didn't have on our old platform. So the way I want to end this talk off is to summarize that should you rewrite, I'm going to say that most of the time the answer is no. You could probably do with a good refactor, and good team dynamics really do promote code longevity. But if you've looked at all the data and you see that a rewrite will really put you in a better position, then you should go for it. Just outline the process properly and have a plan in mind. Also know that it'll probably take longer than you think and also be a bit harder than you think. Anyway, my name's Dan. Thank you guys for listening to this. I really hope you enjoyed it or it was helpful. Thanks. I think I'll be available for questions now. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Cool. I only got 2 questions. So the first one is, let me get to it. Is should you rewrite if there is no benefit to the end user but a lot for the business? I'm not really sure how you can get in that situation. Maybe. I suppose if there's a lot for the business, it means that it's really hard to develop onto the code base, and that delays you in making the product. And then I suppose then the benefit is for the end user because they'll get, more features quickly. But if there is, I can't. I think you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, okay. So I can't actually imagine that situation where there's literally no benefit for the end user, but a lot for the business. And if there is a lot for the business, then it's probably worthwhile for the business to invest in it. but then it becomes a business decision. I think as devs, we'll probably always want to be in the rewriting phase. Then there's another question, which is, how do you feel with Goose Code? Especially if you have new members trying to prove how fancy they can be, sometimes at the expense of the rest of the team, struggling to understand, grasp it, resulting in time wasted. In my experience, fancier is not always better. So yeah, in my experience, fancier is probably, it's not better. Then Goose Code is terrible. So I've also wanted to rewrite Goose Code because we have a lot of stuff that's written in Goose Code. And then I always thankfully I don't do it because it'll probably be more effort than it's worth. Yeah, I think you're always going to have code that you're just going to have to deal with. You can try refactor it in ways where maybe you can simplify it a little bit at a time. Maybe you can't, maybe you can. If you have new developers trying to be really fancy, they have to go through a PR process, and then you can talk them down a bit and then ask them to explain why they did something in some way and not another way that maybe you would have done. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, don't make me think of Goose Code now. 3, did you look at Vue.js at all? Yes, I did look at Vue.js. We looked at Nuxt. Right now we're using Next.js as a platform. I love Vue.js, by the way. My own site is written in that. But the reason we didn't go with Vue.js is I think Next.js is a more stable platform. Also, we work with an outsourced team, and they know React really well. So rather than upskilling people on Vue, we just went with React, which I don't mind either. React is also really nice. How long did it take you to edit, produce that video? And do you have a YouTube channel? I do not have a YouTube channel. That video took me like a week, and I was also sick during that week. So yeah. Question number 5. Is there any advice that you might have ways to define how much technical becomes critical mass for rewrite? I'm not sure I understand that. Is there any advice you might have ways to define how much how much technical debt becomes critical mass for a rewrite? Geez, I don't know if I really understand that question, but I suppose if you're going into the rewrite and you have to deal with technical debt while you're doing it, it slows you down, because what you do during a rewrite is you have to cater for all the edge cases that the previous code base catered for, and at the same time you're trying to say that you can do it in a better way, which is not always the case. You try to do it in a better way, but technical debt it's not the worst thing in the world, because I watched another talk where a guy explains that debt is a reasonable thing to have. When you buy a house, you get something, but you've taken on debt, and you're going to be paying off that debt the whole time you're working on the code base. So you're never going to get rid of technical debt. I don't think I'm answering this question properly. I don't think I really understood it. I'm sorry. What are your thoughts on Google Kubernetes engines versus Google Cloud Run? I'm not going to be the best person to answer that. I've never used Google Cloud Run, but I love Google Kubernetes. So right now, there's probably no reason for us to swap over to anything else, or even to look at anything else, because it runs really well. Hi, Dan. How would you deal with a situation where code presumes itself as more efficient, but in actual fact just looks like more code? You also don't want to offend that person. First, I wouldn't worry about offending people. You shouldn't tie. No one should tie themselves to the code they've written and be like, "This is mine. It's so precious. It's amazing." Your code is outside of you. It has a job to perform. If it can be done in a better way, then it must be done in a better way. Code is actually a very logical thing, and not everyone knows. Not everyone is the best at it at every time. If someone can help, if I'm in the position where I write something and somebody else has a better way to deal with it, I would gladly see the better way to do it, and then just learn from the experience. So where it presumes itself to be more efficient, but in actual fact just looks like more code. I will always go with less code is more, pretty much 100% of the time. If it's like micro efficiency that you're after, then you're probably down the wrong avenue. I don't look at micro performance gains because there's no point. Question 8. How would you quantify the cost savings for a rewrite? How would you quantify the cost savings? Okay, so I think the cost savings for a rewrite are actually like quite easy. So it's like you just take how long it takes you to develop a new feature and what features you want to develop versus, and how long that will take versus if you rewrite them and then start developing those features. In our case, once we've done this rewrite, we'll be able to develop features like way faster. Question 10. Did you do things like write new features in new tech and just kind of plug, like use iframes them into the old system? Old system becomes like, no. So we didn't use iframes to do anything. So what we're doing is we actually have 2 code bases running on 2 different servers, and we use Cloudflare. Well, we don't actually use Cloudflare anymore. We switched over to Fastly, but that was before I'd finished the talk, after I finished the talk. So we actually have 2 backends running, and then we swap them based on the URL. Question 11, is less code more readable code? No. So not all the time, but I think most of the time less code is more readable code, even if it's like syntactic sugar. So like when you look at promises and then you look at using async await, async await obviously looks much more readable, even though, yeah, it is probably less code, and then that becomes more readable. But then some people also have to be familiar. If you're using like array map or array filter, then like I don't want to say it's simpler code. Maybe not. Yeah, it's simpler code, but it might not be easier to understand. As long as the person is proficient, who's reading the code, and they can understand it well, then that's good. You're not making, yeah. As long as the developer can go into the code base, look at the code and understand it, then you've won. If it does take more code to get to that point, then yeah, that's a hard question. I think that's probably dependent on circumstance. You don't want to have like a long, this like chained method thing that's one line is definitely worse than something that's like 10 lines, but you can understand what's happening. Are you using React Native for your mobile app? Currently, the mobile app is actually written by an outsourced team, and I believe it was written in React.js with Cordova. So it's not using React Native. What we'll do with this project is we'll export static pages, and then with Next.js and then we'll use Capacitor, and we'll export an APK from that. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I think, oh yeah, well, there wasn't, okay, well, there wasn't a comment section, but your session was great, and happy with the Q7 answer. Okay, I think that's it, guys. Okay, how long did the rewrite take? Estimated versus actual time. Did you estimate how long it will take and how? So this is a pressing issue. So in the beginning, we didn't really have a time estimate for the initial phase because we were setting everything up and we were actually just like playing with technology and playing with things. So we have set, and there was no real time limit set for rewriting that new car section. We're still actually busy rewriting the whole site. We haven't finished. Next up, we're rewriting like a view vehicle page. So when you click on a search item and you see a vehicle, we're rewriting that specific page. And that's meant to be finished tomorrow. And I don't think it will be finished tomorrow, but it should be finished by next week. But yeah, so I think we just have to, when working, check timelines at a way smaller scale. It's going to be impossible to figure out how long this project will take by looking at the whole project. The project is huge. Why did you decide to use 2 separate systems versus putting both sites on the same platform? I'm thinking if you want to add more and more sites with the same foundation. So the two sites are on two different platforms at the moment. One is running on a local server and the other is running on Kubernetes. So eventually it'll all run on Kubernetes. So eventually it all will be one system again. But we decided putting it on two because eventually we want it to be in the cloud. The other one's not on the cloud. That's why. Are you still a Clojure house? Do you use React or ARM? So we're using React straight up. We are still a Clojure house. Some of our projects are in Clojure. Well, one of our main projects is in Clojure, and we still have microservices running Clojure. But the reason we didn't do this the reason we didn't do the rewrite in Clojure was because we wanted to use the Next.js framework for server-side rendering, and it made things a lot faster. Yeah, that's it. Cool. Okay, cool, guys. So, cheers. Thanks, everyone, for watching. It was really awesome. I appreciate everyone's comments and the questions. Cheers.